Who's hitting the ground running, and I know that there's a lot that he's got on his plate, and we previewed a little bit of that yesterday when he did his official swearing in. But one of the things that we've worked hard on this year has been this idea of DOGEing all areas of government. And that obviously started with the Trump administration, the president, Elon Musk, and really looking at the federal government. Obviously, we know there's a lot of problems with how the federal government operates. But we looked in Florida and said, you know, even though we have the second lowest spending per capita in the country, even though we've paid down record amounts of outstanding state debt just since I've been governor, even though we're cutting taxes, we're doing all this, we have the lowest number of state workers per capita of any state in the country. We want to look at ourselves at the state level, and particularly at our universities. And so we did an executive order ordering all the agency heads to start using some of this artificial intelligence, because they're supposed to do reviews of what's going on, contracts, all this stuff. But let's harness artificial intelligence, some of these things, to look at our own agencies, but then also at these universities. And you know, the universities get a lot of money. I think there was a view of universities that somehow they're entitled to just do what they want. And I've said, no, actually the taxpayers fund your universities, and so you got to pursue a mission that's consistent with the goals of the state of Florida. And so we've done things like eliminate DE&I. We've done things that are trying to focus the universities on their core mission. So there's mission creep there, and then we're going through all that. But then we also said we need to look at state and local governments. Now, I didn't have authority per se to just demand everything. I do have some constitutional authority that we exercised, but we also work with the legislature to get some concrete DOGE authority for the state of Florida vis-a-vis state and local governmental entities. And then the chief financial officer has longstanding authority to conduct oversight and audits of government institutions that receive state funding, which is almost basically every institution in Florida receives some form of state funding. So we are pleased to really get the ground running now. I mean, the budget was signed at the end of June, took effect July 1st. We've been doing some planning on this. Obviously, Blaze I put Blaze in to be the CFO because there was a vacancy there, and so now it's off to the races. Now, I think there's problems in local governments. Some local governments have done a good job. I mean, I think we have a big, diverse state, and it's not necessarily like this part of the state is all bad, this part of the state's all good. It's really a mix. And I've had a lot of complaints from folks down here in South Florida vis-a-vis some of the governments, but we've also had complaints in Northwest Florida and in other parts. And so it's important to just put all this in perspective. But I will say this, if you look at the state of Florida, if you go back 15 years, the average Floridian was $1,200 per, if you took the state debt, you would be about $1,200 that you would owe as a Floridian. We've now driven that down to under $500 per Floridian. So the total state debt of all of Florida's history, if they somehow just said, you got to write a check, we got to pay it off tomorrow, you'd pay somewhere around $400. Now, if they told you from the federal government, and they told you had to write a check for your share of the federal debt as an American citizen, you'd have to write a check for like $106,000. And so it's way different. Our debt is declining. The budget I signed, and I did about $600 million in line item vetoes to get it in line with my proposed spending levels from my governor's recs. But we spent less last fiscal year than the year before, and we're spending less this fiscal year than we did in the fiscal year that just elapsed at the end of June. There's not a lot of states that can say that they're actually doing that. Obviously, the federal government hasn't cut spending. So we're in a good position as a state, but we always want to do better. So we've started with state, and we're going to continue to do that. But we also now have the ability to bring this into the state and local level. And so I did do an executive order with the authority that we had. There were some things that people had to do. There was some stuff before the legislature acted that was more voluntary. Some local governments took us up on that offer. Other local governments did not take us up on that offer, as you might imagine. And so there was a disagreement among some. You had some commissions would vote, and it'd be a divided vote, and sometimes they would comply, sometimes they wouldn't. My view would be you should be proud of what you're doing and proud of your budgeting and your spending, that you should welcome this stuff to be able to trumpet that to your constituency. But that wasn't true for everybody. And so, we are here today with our new CFO, Blaise Ngolia, that we are going to start doing on-site DOGE inspections and audits of local and of county and municipal governments. So beginning on July 31st, our teams are composed of auditors and other skilled staff that are drawn from various state agencies. They will be using the authority that I mentioned to conduct reviews of the data systems, physical premises, and personnel of counties and cities that have thus far refused to cooperate with us to identify and report on any excessive spending patterns. And we'll be doing this through our new authority, as I mentioned, which includes granting access to spending records, and we'll be starting with those jurisdictions which have received a lot of complaints for their spending practices. And so we're here in Broward County, and I think most people know there's some criticism of how the county government has operated. And I think over the last 5 years, taxpayers here in Broward have watched their county government has increased property tax burdens by the tune of $450 million in addition to ad valorem collections. So that's an increase of close to 50% just since 2020. But yet, the population of Broward has barely grown at all, less than 5% net since 2020. So why is the tax going up almost 50% while the population is going up less than 5%? There are things that as population grows, we've seen this in the state of Florida, more people pay sales tax, you end up having higher receipts, but that's because of economic growth and more population. You haven't seen the population increase here. Now, Broward has also spent a lot of money on kind of pet causes, whether it's DE&I, whether it's the Green New Deal. They even did, I think it was, what was it, $800,000 for the Rose Bowl. They did a float in the Rose Bowl. The county administrator here makes almost $500,000 a year. So there's a lot of things that really deserve scrutiny. And here's the thing, you're taxed just for living in your home as a Florida resident, and where is that money going to? We always hear it's about schools and police. Well, we all agree with that. But what about this other spending, and why has that gone up so much when there hasn't been an obvious justification to be able to do it? So we have the authority. This is no longer optional. We don't have to ask, Mother, may I? We can just simply say, you must comply under the law. Of course, there are supporting mechanisms built into the law for municipalities and counties that are non-compliant. And then, of course, I have constitutional authority to ensure that folks are following the law. So I look forward to these audits. So we are announcing today, Broward County. We've got another announcement later today in Gainesville, but you are going to see a cadence of these put out very quickly over the next couple weeks. And so it's not just going to be in one part of the state. It's going to be across the board. We have gotten a lot of valuable information from folks that voluntarily participated, but I think that there's jurisdictions that didn't want to participate. We understand that, but we also understand that that's not going to be acceptable for the taxpayers here in the state of Florida. Before I turn it over to Blaise, I just want to make a quick comment on, the city of Miami. They cooked up this scheme with, I think, 3 of the 5 commissioners that they would just cancel the election scheduled for this November. extend their own terms in office, which the voters had never approved. That also violates term limits effectively, and that was just something that was going to be all hunky-dory. And I know a lot of people were concerned about it. I raised concerns about it and said it was bad. The Attorney General of Florida said it was not legal, what they were trying to do. I know a lot of voters and residents down in South Florida were not happy with seeing that. And so yesterday there was a court ruling to say that no, you can't cancel the election, you can't extend your terms in office unless you get the approval of the voters. And isn't that how it should be? I mean, you as a voter go in to elect someone for a fixed term knowing you have another shot to have new elections at a fixed time, and that they can just decide, you know, we're just going to dispense with that and go. That doesn't fly. First of all, it wasn't legal. But even if somehow it was legal, is there anyone that can make an argument with a straight face about why that would be something that would be acceptable to just thrust upon the voters without their consent? Of course not. So we were very much pleased to see that court ruling. I anticipated that court ruling because I think that what they were trying to do just ran afoul of not just the law, but basic common sense and principles of fairness. And so I hope that they'll be able to conduct a free and fair election this November. And if they want to change the dates of their election, you go to the voters before you do that. And you lay out a plan that you wanted in an even year. You don't just say, you know, we're just going to stay in office a little bit longer, and regardless of what the voters think. So I appreciate those who were involved in that litigation, and I think it was the right decision. Okay, you know, we got our fearless fiscal warrior, Blaise Ngolia. Come on up.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Good morning, and thank you, Governor, for leading on this issue. It's an important issue. We got some feedback back there, huh? So I want to thank you. There is a new era of accountability in the state of Florida when it comes to fiscal spending. I will tell you that I cut my teeth years ago calling out local wasteful spending. What I've seen that local governments are usually have the most egregious patterns of spending money on stuff that, quite frankly, if the voters knew and we shone a light on it, they would probably disagree with. Broward County, unfortunately, is probably, in my mind, one of the worst offenders when it comes to spending. And the reason being is that because the county is full, there's a lot of people here, so there's not much in terms of population growth. One of the metrics we should use when it comes to spending is what was your budget before? If you add inflation and population growth, what should it be? And then what is it actually depending upon your current budget? Well, if you don't have population growth, you can't use the argument that we have that many more people. There's not that many developments being approved in the state of Florida. They're not adding that much more people. So yes, is there inflation? Yes. But the amount of money that is being asked of the taxpayers in the state of in Broward on behalf of their local government is far outstripping, in my opinion, the residents and the taxpayers' willingness and ability to pay. They're putting a crunch. One of the big issues that I am pushing for is affordability in housing, insurance and taxes. Taxes are one of the things that we can handle. So if we can get government to reduce spending, right-size their spending by getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and quite frankly, the things that you probably wouldn't approve of, then we start off with a lower base number. Broward is taken in with very little population growth, I think an extra $500 million worth of property tax revenues. That's a lot of money, and we have to start asking ourselves, and quite frankly, we need to start asking local government, where are you spending this money? And then let the people know what they're spending the money on, and then let the people make the decision if this is worthwhile. From some of the stuff that we've seen, like $800,000 on a float at the Rose Bowl parade, probably not the best use of taxpayer money. Now, that is TDT money, I get it, but it goes to show a bigger, that is just a symptom of excessive, reckless spending where, quite frankly, they don't care. I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of local officials just don't care because they don't view it as their own money. You know, they view it as somebody like this endless pot of money. But you know what? The taxpayer, you guys are the endless pot of money. The power to tax citizens should not be taken lightly. If you're in office and you're taxing, you should be asking yourselves, if this was my own personal money, would I make the same investment? Would I spend the same thing? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. It's unfortunate, but government, over the past 20 years, all levels of government, I would say that the state is a heck of a lot better fiscally responsible, more fiscally responsible than what we're seeing at the federal government and the local government. But this is what really gets my craw is, how many times have you seen local governments sit there and cry poor, and then all of a sudden they ask for more money in terms of an additional sales tax going on the ballot? No. This is the first part in accountability and transparency that we're bringing to local governments, and saying that, no, we are tired of the reckless spending. We are overspending and overtaxation. So going into the books through Florida DOGE's effort, through the CFO's office, and having auditors go in and start questioning some of these things is the first step to bringing fiscal sanity back to local governments. Because quite frankly, local governments have been running amok for way too long. I look forward to working with this governor. I look forward to working with Florida DOGE's team to start bringing shining a light on some of this wasteful, egregious spending. I thank you for everything that you know, that you have somebody in the CFO's office who's going to look out for your best interest, the taxpayers' interest. Governor, I thank you for this leadership.
Okay. And I appreciate Blaise, taking this on. One of the things that I did when I became governor was I actually just studied all the constitutional statutory provisions that related to the executive's ability to move policy. And there's certain things that are there that you're entitled, obviously, to wield on behalf of the people that sent you there. And this authority in the CFO's office to be in there and doing these audits, I think is really important authority. I think it's appropriate, and I'm glad that Blaise is really going headstrong into to using this in a really good way. So this is just the start. There's going to be more over the next, particularly couple weeks, that we're going to do around the state. I think you'll see counties, but I also think you'll see cities, and I think that there's going to be a lot of taxpayers that are going to be happy that this is being done. And ultimately, this is what it's about: the people that pay the bills, who work hard and have their money, have their incomes or their property taxed to be able to support these services. And while there's certain things that we all support, we know that some of this stuff has gone astray. So let's show some accountability here. Yes, sir.
Yes, Governor Chris Nelson. With your history with Broward County, you know these guys are going to buck, and this can be for you or for Blaise. What enforcement mechanisms are you specifically willing to go to, and will this cover things all the way back to the COVID spending, the school board, and stuff like that?
So there is mechanisms in the law to be able to hold accountable for noncompliance, and it's basically, you have certainly daily fines. We would construe every individual request as a separate act of disobedience, and so if we send one letter with 50, and none of them are complied with, that's 50, right? And so those fines would multiply for one day and then continue going. So I think that's a pretty good disincentive. There also, the law is clear. There's some people say, well, why would the state of Florida care, how the county in Broward or the, place at Alachua or Hillsborough or any of these places spend their money. And the reality is the folks you elected put this into law. So that's the law. And if you don't like that, then you can elect new people and try to change it in the future. But that's the law. You don't have the right to just pick and choose which laws that you want to apply. So we'll make sure that that's done. I know Blaise will be a hawk on this. We obviously will use our authority, and then quite frankly, I'm sure the Attorney General will ensure that there's compliance. So there's going to be compliance. That's just the way the people have spoken on this. We have the authority. I was very public about asking for this, and we got it done. And so now we're going to do the people's business. Yes, sir.
Can you break down, Broward County's millage rate has stayed flat for the last 8 years. Why is that not enough relief for taxpayers? Also, you mentioned a small change in percentage of population growth, but it's like 100,000, somewhere in 100,000 people a year moving to Broward County.
So a couple answers. First, I want to answer Chris's question in terms of, as a legislator, I get appropriation requests all the time, right? Now, I get it from my counties where they say that I previously represented Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, and Sumter counties, and now we get appropriation requests and asking for money. And the first thing I ask myself is, do they need the money? What is the money being expended for? But I think the question we need to ask is, the counties who are requesting the money actually spending the money that they have wisely? And what will frustrate me is when I see a county egregiously spending, not being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and then all of a sudden put in appropriation requests. So to answer your question in terms of accountability, I think that if a county, municipality, city, any government entity is putting in a appropriation request because they want more money, and we have proven through Florida DOGE efforts, through the audits through the CFO's office, that they are wasting the money that they have right now, they shouldn't be allowed to ask for any more money. We as a state should not give them an appropriation of $10, $15 million if A, they're sitting on a bunch of money in their coffers right now in their investment funds in their reserves, or if they've proven that they're not good stewards of the taxpayer money. If you need money for something and you don't have money, then that is a difference than if you have the money and you're wasting the money and then you're asking the money. We're not going to pour good money after bad. And to your point about the millage rate theoretically should be going down in those issues, not remaining flat. Remaining flat with the increase in the property taxes yields a lot more money, $450 million, almost $500 million more. If you look at some of the places in the state that have the highest property values, and I'm thinking Monroe County right now, over the years, the maximum allowed millage rate you can have per section in your trim notices is 10, right? I think there are some exceptions for small counties to pierce that. But if you're at 10 and property values go up, if you want to keep the same revenue, the millage rate should be going down, not staying the same. So when your county comes out and says, well, you know, our millage rate has stayed the same, that's a tax increase in this scenario. It's not a tax decrease. It's not even taking in the same amount of revenue. So millage rate should be going down, not staying stable, and they should definitely not be going up.
Well, but I think the issue, it's an unrealized gain property. That's the problem. That's why it's unjust, quite frankly, to have a homeowner who's, working hard, doing all this, and you're still having to pony up money, basically paying rent just to be on your property to the government. That's not true homeownership. And so it's an unrealized gain. That's why they're taxing it. So yes, if the tax rate was the same and you were only taxing realized gains, then you could have a point. But it's an unrealized gain. So people's values are going up, partially because housing's gone up across the country, but even more so in Florida because there's been demand to come here. And so people are paying more. Even homesteaded properties are paying more. And then, heaven forbid, you have a young family, you grow out of a house, you want to buy, then you're at a much higher cost basis right there, and you're paying a lot more. So they're taxing unrealized gains. And so if you're taxing unrealized gains, to say you're keeping the millage rate the same, you're taxing higher values. People are having to pay more, but they've never sold the home at that point. This is just paper value. And it's interesting, how often are they aggressive to assess your property value lower? No, that's not what they do. Yes.
In regards to the City of Miami ruling yesterday, would you like to personally see those elected officials held accountable? And then secondly, when can we expect the Lieutenant Governor announcement? Jay Collins, perhaps?
So I told people I would deal with these appointments after the legislative session. Obviously went till the end of June, so we were able to do the CFO. So the LG we're working on. I just got to vet people, right? And there's different folks that want it or this, and so it'll be soon, but it's not necessarily going to be today or tomorrow. Now look, on the City of Miami. Now some people ask me, could you remove the commissioners? And actually, the way Florida law is, governor has way more authority over county elected officials than municipal. So the municipal, really, there needs to be a criminal pretext for the governor to exercise the suspension authority there. Now, why they did this? Was there something behind the scene? I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a shady thing, right? But I think probably the best way to do it in the short term is we got an election coming up in November, and I think the voters of Miami, and interesting, this is an issue that spans party. Democrats and Republicans, that I've seen, all thought that this was a bad idea. The voters. I know some entrenched politicians thought it was a good idea, but this was a bad idea. And so I think the city's going to have an opportunity to elect a reform mayor and some of these commissioners. That's probably the best way in the immediate aftermath. Now on county stuff, like on the immigration stuff, I mean, if you have duties under the law, if you're neglecting those duties, then the governor does have the authority to suspend under those circumstances. So, yes, sir.
Thanks, I appreciate it. With respect to municipalities that are not in compliance, is the sanction withholding state funding and appropriations, is that about the only sanction, or?
Fines. So the where's Erica?
I'm sorry. My other question was,
We have the fines, or how much a day?
$1,000 per day.
For each line item. So, so for example, if we send a letter to a city and say, provide us information on these 100 things, and they don't do it, then each individual item would be a daily fine of $1,000. So that'd be $100,000 a day for 100 items, and that obviously multiplies very quickly. Yes, the appropriations process, I think, is a separate one. I think Blaze makes a great point. His authority obviously is triggered by the receipt of state funds, and so if you have a county that doesn't receive any state funds, which I don't think any county in Florida receives no state funds, then you would be immune from the CFO's oversight. So I think there's going to be both. And then I think clearly if it came to something where you just had a neglect of obvious duties in some of these positions, to the extent governor's constitutional authority is implicated, you would have the ability to do that. So I'm confident that the enforcement is going to be adequate. And here's the thing, people say, fine, just comply, we'll do it. I would love for some of the areas where people have told us, hey, you got to audit here, I would love for those to come back passing with flying colors. I mean, that'd be good for taxpayers if that happened.
so you said both meeting appropriate state funding and the fine. That's the
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think so.
One quick question on alligator opportunity.
Sure.
Lawyers are not able to see their clients out there. What do you think, being a lawyer yourself and a JAG lawyer? What are your
Well,
thoughts on
I first of all, I don't know. Here's what I think is happening. You have some of these, and a lot of these are criminal aliens, and they will make claims, and then the media is kind of running with it. I know that the DHS anticipated that there would be legal involvement, and I know they even have a place where people can read books about this stuff. So that was all being kind of. Now I haven't been down there since the president was there. I may go back down very soon, but it's odd that they're going in there. I mean, you have these representatives. I mean, first of all, they're just trying to get some notoriety. So they're making these claims, and they're saying, oh, they're not fed well. Well, first of all, they're fed the same that the staff is fed. You go to and it's not a prison, it's a deportation processing center, so it is different. But in Florida prisons, do you think the prisoners get the same meals as the guards? No, of course not. It's different. Everyone's the same there, and they were mad that the ham sandwiches weren't toasted. Excuse me? I mean, give me a break. So DHS, required there to be certain things. I know the legal was a part of that. There is recreation. People say there's not, and there is. People will show. So I'm confident that whatever is required will be satisfied. I know that there's an effort to try to put whatever narratives out there that you can, but I'm confident that they'll get the job done. But here's the thing. Ultimately, the goal is you need a place that you can process and deport efficiently. If you want to be able to remove illegal aliens from the country, particularly the criminal aliens who shouldn't be anywhere in our communities, that needs to have some infrastructure to go with it. DHS does not have enough spaces to be able to do it. So we're running into situations. Florida's aggressive. Our state and local are required to participate. So our highway patrol, they may bust some van, and there may be 10 illegals in a van. they can bring to ICE, but if ICE doesn't have room for them, then ICE basically just either has to release them or hope that you can put somebody in a state, a county or a city facility. And you can do that at some point, but we don't have the space there. So that's why they're doing it. I think DHS is going to ramp up its space, which will be very helpful for this. And so there's a lot of logistics. There's a lot of, I mean, people say there's no due process. Actually, there's a lot of due process. That's why it takes this way. I mean, my view would just be, it's like, okay, are you here? Do you have a right to be here? Show us. Okay, let's look at this. We think not. And then just make a quick decision. And obviously, if someone has a right then to be, then they shouldn't be involved in any of this stuff. I would also note this. When you go into Alligator Alcatraz as an illegal, the first thing DHS does is they give you a brochure and they tell you, you don't have to come here. You can get at federal expense, all expenses paid flight back to your home country. No questions asked. Now, obviously, they'll escort you to make sure you're getting on the plane. They check to make sure you land. But they are offering that for every single one of these folks who end up being brought there. So nobody has to go there if they don't want. They do have the ability to take the DHS up on their offer and go back to their home country. I don't see that mentioned as much, but that is definitely part of it, and it makes sense financially because whatever the cost of the ticket is going to be less than going through a more lengthy process and then end up flying people out at like a military or DHS aircraft. So, yes, sir.
Back to the audit really fast. You mentioned that you're starting with the counties that haven't voluntarily agreed to be part of the auditing. Do you know off the top of your head where the other South Florida counties stand, Miami-Dade, Monroe, Palm Beach?
So, Miami-Dade, we have had some cooperation. I guess you'd say some cooperation with, I know we work with one of the commissioners, Eric. Would that be, I don't think they fully got on board, but we do have some of the commissioners are helping on that. So I would say that they've been better than some, but not good enough. And so I think it's very possible that you see an announcement on Miami-Dade within the next couple weeks. I think it's also possible that you could see an announcement on Palm Beach. And then there's also municipalities in South Florida as well. We're going to do another announcement later today, and then through the balance of this week and next, there'll be more that are going to be doing. But I think it's going to be, certainly going to be, probably 10 to 15 counties, municipalities split that are going to get the on-site DOGE inspections.
Has Broward completely been not cooperative? How would you characterize?
Well, so it's interesting. I guess they did submit something late yesterday, correct?
They responded to our most recent information request. They have not passed a resolution announcing that they are a cooperating jurisdiction or a resolution of support for the DOGE effort as over 75 other jurisdictions across the state.
So Eric Soskin is our DOGE head for the state governor's office, and so he's doing so yeah, they haven't done the compliance that we obviously hope for. They did submit an answer, I think, close of business yesterday on that. Now we had already decided that this was going to be something that we were going to do going forward. So.
You mentioned there's a lot of complaints into how Broward County is spending. Do you know who those complaints are from? How many?
Taxpayers, yeah. I mean, I think taxpayers. When we started announcing DOGE. We got a lot of incoming on, a handful. I mean, I'd say Broward was one people talked about. I'd say Gainesville and Alachua were big. I would say Hillsborough. I would say Manatee. I would say there's some Northeast Florida. So, and then there's some agencies within county governments in particular. There's a couple sheriff's departments across the state that people have had concerns about. And then it's also just, we're looking at, you've had basically modest population, but big increases in spending. And that's the thing. You do have to look at population growth and the fact that we did have inflation. So it's like if you look at the state of Florida, if you go back to 2019 pre-COVID, we were spending in the between $90 and $100 billion for our state budget. The budget I just signed, although it's been a reduction 2 years in a row, was I think about $117 billion all in when you include everything. Now, if you adjust for the population growth we've had, which has been significant, and inflation, that's definitely not a net spending increase given that, because inflation's been 20-25% since COVID. in our population, we went from, when I got elected governor, I think we were 21.5 million. You know, we're close to 23.5 million now. I mean, so we've had a net increase in population of 1.5 to 2 million residents. And so when you account for that, and how does that matter? It's like, so with roads, you know, I've had to put more money into roads. And do that to accelerate because, you know, we have growth and you have traffic problems. It's harder in South Florida because so much is built out. Most of the other parts of the state, you have an ability to do some things, widen lanes, do things that will relieve. So if you look at like what we've done on I-4, the I-4 project in Orlando until about you get to Disney, that's made a big difference. Now we've done a temporary lane from Disney into Polk County. That's increased the flow dramatically. That's going to be a permanent fix. We're going to have lane exposure. So like we have to do those things. We have to build new schools, right? When the population warrants it, and you have too many in one, you gotta do that. So those are things that just kind of happen. But I think what the state of Florida has done a good job of doing is not saddling taxpayers with recurring ballooning expenses. Move Florida Forward was like, you know, one shot. We did a $7-8 billion infusion. And it's gonna make a huge difference, and then we'll move on. If you look at some of the things we've done in environment, I just announced a big agreement with the Army Corps. They're going to delegate us authority to move some of these Everglades projects faster that the federal government was responsible for, and we can do it faster. So we're now going to do it. That whole enterprise south of Lake Okeechobee is going to be done 5 years where it was currently scheduled. And so that's a huge thing. But, you know, my goal is you know, we opened the C-43 reservoir on the western side of Lake Okeechobee. You know, we put a lot of money into that. That's good. And there's obviously upkeep. But when you get the infrastructure in place, you do the water flow, you will be able to spend less in the future. I really believe that. So these are things that just you go. But I'd say from the state's perspective, we always want to do better. But I don't think there's any state in the country that can say they've cut spending on net the last 3 years, which is what we've done, and so I think that's a good thing. So, all right,
Sheriff's office or just offices under the county?
I think that's all fair game. I think when you're talking about property tax revenue, where does that go? I mean, the thing that people say is that that's the schools and the law enforcement, and I think I've been a big supporter of law enforcement, obviously, and I think that, you know, we have the best sheriffs in the country in the state of Florida, but I would not say all 67 departments, you know, are run great. I would say most of them are run well, but I would say that there are some that need to be looked at, and I think this could be one here, and I also think there's a couple others that have been brought to mind about where you would look to do. So stay tuned on all that. All right, we'll be back soon, guys. Thank you.